Hello, folks. Welcome to June the 6th, 2024. 80 years ago, the events were unfolding just up the road from where I am in Normandy, but I have chosen not to be out at one of the ceremonies. I don't want to be in the queues, frankly, but also I want to be here to speak to my dedicated and loyal audience, some of whom are up at stupid o'clock at different parts of the world to be here. We are kicking off the first of 8 shows today with a chat with Joseph Quinn of Their Finest Hour. And he's here to talk about what they have learnt about D-Day through this memory project that we have already discussed on the channel. I'll bring you in now. Good morning, Joe. A few tech problems this morning that we haven't quite managed to sort, but it's great to speak to you.
Yes, it's rather unfortunate. I did have some very nice visuals I did want to share, but we'll make do.
So, though, for those who aren't familiar with this project, we're in this era now. The big thing we're dealing with in Normandy is the lack of eyewitness accounts. There's about 200 veterans in Normandy, but 20 years ago, there would have been thousands, and we're just about to close the door on anyone who lived through it. So what we want to talk about is what your project was and the importance of this speeding up of collecting memories from those who were there and those who are descended from those who were there. So tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I suppose what we've been doing over the past couple of years is we have been focusing very heavily on gathering the stories from the loved ones of those members of the wartime generation who have since passed on, some in more recent times and others, for longer ago, maybe 10, 20, even 30 years ago. And what we have discovered, I suppose, is that the memory is still alive, it's vibrant, and people still treasure the memory. But like memory in general, it is fading. And this is one of the curious things about memory, is that I think what we're seeing is when a generation kind of reaches the end of their life cycle and there's a sort of a transition period, a handover period where that generation disappears. Suddenly, as the memory, it leaves living memory, suddenly you have almost a sort of a gradual forgetting of kinds taking place within society. There is a shift in the public consciousness, and this is something that we've kind of been discovering. The memory is quite strong as it's held on to by the children of the wartime generation, but when it passes on again to the next generation, things can be forgotten or not passed on in the way that they would have been from father to son, from mother to daughter. So this is why we felt we needed to launch the project. This is one of the reasons why we needed to do it now rather than waiting until around about the time of the centenary, like happened with the First World War. What we felt we needed to do was we felt we needed to get the memory while it was fresh and while a portion of that wartime generation were still alive. And there's still a lot of eyewitnesses that are to the Second World War that are still living, they will be with us for some time to come. Probably by the time we get to the 90th, we might have a few, like a smattering of a remnant of the wartime generation. But there'd be hardly anyone left really by that point. The veterans would be long gone. And we will start to see the shift in memory occur at this particular point.
Brilliant. So obviously someone like a military historian going out to research a particular story, they're looking for archives about a subject. So there's a certain amount of anticipation about what they're going to find, and it will go either align with what they thought or it'll, give in new information. But what you're doing, which is just casting this massive wide net out for memories, you obviously went into it having no idea, A, how many were going to come in, and B, what were going to come in. So obviously the focus today is D-Day. So we haven't got the visuals, but just take us through some of the incredible D-Day recollections and artifacts and stories that came through.
Paul?
Yep. Did you hear that?
Hello, Paul. Yes, I did hear that. You want me to take you through some stories? Yes. Okay, so the stories that we've had on DDay, and I'm so sorry we can't seem to get you visuals through. I don't know whether it's poor internet connection or anything else like that. But one of the things I would say is that the stories that we've gathered for DDay, and there's hundreds of them, these stories convey, just the enormity of Operation Overlord, and sort of all, like, I mean, against the backdrop of this massive mechanical logistical operation, a very real human drama taking place. And so we have personal stories coming across, and we've got stories of people providing, a functional service within that operation. One of the first stories I was going to share with you was the story of Major George Stidwell. Now, Major George Stidwell was a bigot. That's not a racist. It's not somebody who has a prejudice against other people or anything like that. A bigot in the context of Operation Overlord is somebody, as you know, Paul, who has a piece of the puzzle. He had a piece of the secret plan for Operation Overlord, and he had in his possession what was known as a bogus map, and this bogus map was a map of Sword Beach. These maps are incredibly rare. There's not many copies or duplicates of this particular item, and also he had target photographs of Sword Beach as well, oblique photographs that were taken through low-level reconnaissance, presumably by Spitfire reconnaissance aircraft, and also photographs taken from above, essentially mapping out the entire area in detail. And he had specific instructions. His job, he was Royal Army Ordnance Corps, and his job was really to effectively arrange the ammunition dumps, secure particular sites so the ammo dumps can be set up as quickly as possible to provide the ammunition to support the advance inland. Sorry, Paul, you're on mute.
Sorry, no, yeah, and this is the kind of thing that you're going to be launching your project live on your website later. So this is just a taster. Your big launch is coming up. So maybe a good point to tell people. I mean, the link is in below, but what's going to happen with your project later today?
Well, what's going to happen with my project later today is, but basically what's happening right now. The link is live. If you go to theirfinesthour.org, if you click on it, you will be able to go straight in there, and you will be able to view our collections. And what you will see in the website interface is you will see things arranged by theme. You will see Commonwealth contributions. You will see a separate section for D-Day stories. You'll see a section about various different campaigns. It's mainly arranged into themes. And what you will see is essentially a thematically arranged array, which will guide you into our website. And you'll be able to search through our collections. And there are over 25,000 items held within this collection, and thousands of stories to sift through. And essentially, I mean, this is all free to use, and people can search to their heart's content and use this material for research purposes or to supplement their own understanding of the war. It's whatever you make of it yourself. And we want as many people to engage with this archive as possible. Sorry, Paul.
My microphone keeps muting itself for some reason. What's going on? And that's the important thing about the direction we're moving with archives is the freedom of access, because copyright law, extension of who owns photos and footage is a complicated factor for historians across the world to bring information. So the very fact that you're putting this information out there is to yours and the organization's credit. So so thanks for that on behalf of historians around the world. But we'll do a few more stories. So back to you, Joseph. Share some of the the other things that came in.
Well, the other items that really came into us were, connected with the Overlord operation were, there were personal stories. I mean, we had a story of a Pioneer Corps soldier who was from, this is a story that's close to my heart because this Pioneer Corps soldier is from Ireland. And he came to the United Kingdom when he was 14 years old. So he left at a very young age. He came from a sort of a rural family background in Kenmare in County Kerry, and he emigrated to the UK, as many Irish did, in order to seek employment. But he came over here at a very, very young age and was over here in the 1930s, and it was doing various different jobs. And then eventually he joined the army sort of towards the end of the 1930s. And he ends up meeting his wife, Margaret, effectively she's an ambulance driver. She's training to be an ambulance driver. And essentially what takes place is she offers to sell him a ticket for a charity dance. And he says he will buy a ticket if she promises to dance with him. And they get married. And essentially, he goes off on D-Day. He essentially arrives in Normandy. I think D+2, D+3, and he's there for essentially the duration of the Northwest European campaign. He was also a Dunkirk veteran as well. It's important to note that. So he had substantial experience of service in Europe during the Second World War in both the campaign in the West and also the Northwest European campaign. But he never spoke about his experiences. He only ever talks to his children about effectively the experiences that he had in terms of meeting his mother and his experiences on the home front. But he never spoke about the war. So this is an indicator of the personal nature of these particular stories, the privacy that went in tandem with essentially, serving in the war and the way in which these stories have been related. I actually spoke to this gentleman's daughter, and I spoke to her last night, and she was very emotional. Her parents' story, I believe, is going to be publicized in an Irish newspaper later today. Just to let you know that the name of this couple is Michael and Margaret Murphy. It went out of my head more or less just as I started.
An Irishman called Michael Murphy.
Michael Murphy. Yeah, I know. This is the thing. It's like he's got a typical. And just to give you, I only knew what he looked like from the photographs. He did have a very sort of ruddy complexion and whatnot. He had ginger hair. A Kerry man, and just sort of very much from what I gather, there's some beautiful photographs. I'm so sorry I can't seem to share these with you today due to the technical difficulties we're encountering. But there's lovely photographs of himself and Margaret photographed at a riverbank having a picnic. The intimacy between them is very clear to see. You can see that they're very much in love. And you see him photographed with other British Army soldiers, including soldiers of other regiments or units of the British Army. There's a Scottish soldier in a photograph. So it's very clear that he made a variety of different friendships over the course of his wartime service. But his daughter insisted he never spoke about his war. He never spoke about his military service or what he saw. It's just not something that he mentioned. And do I think that that's a shame? No, that's the nature of these stories. These stories are what was passed down to the children of the wartime generation by their parents, by their forebears. They're giving the stories as is. And the fact that he chose not to tell his daughter his war story in full is actually in many ways a story in itself.
Well, that's exactly it. Dr. Chris Millington, who's been on the channel a couple of times, he studies the French experience. His latest book is about how people in France who lived through the war shared the story to their children, and if they shared it to their children, and how did they process the different phases of, German attack in 1940, Pétain, Vichy, liberation. And I got the question last night from a couple of people is, what do the people of Normandy think of D-Day? Well, there's a whole range of reactions because there are people whose relatives were killed by the bombing. There are those that have a much more positive memory of encountering a GI and getting a chocolate bar or whatever it would be. And it's the range. And I think we're in this micro analyzing period of the access to after action reports and war diaries and ship's logs, and we're dotting the T's and the I's and crossing the T's. But actually, the human aspect of how stories are told, how families are broken up or come together through these traumatic events is exactly, I'm assuming, the kind of stuff you're getting that isn't just here's a list of equipment a unit had, which is interesting to people interested in that equipment, but it's not gotten a wider interest for us as people. And I think that's what you're doing. So share a little bit more about how, from your experience, this sharing of memories has been a cathartic process for people coming into the project.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, there are so many instances, beginning with, I was telling you the story of George Stidwell. I took that story from his grandson, and, his grandson had a small memory of his grandfather. And, he had met him at some point in his early life, but, he had died when he was very young. And it was almost like he had sort of known his grandfather, but there was so much that was unknown about him. And whatever he learned about who he was really learned from people who knew him, his parents, from, sort of the artifacts and documents that he left behind. And you got some measure of his character, particularly from reading some of the correspondence pertaining to his service. He stayed in the army after the war, for example. So he was one of these individuals that was very clearly depended upon and relied upon, somebody who people trusted implicitly. Essentially, but Giles, his name was Giles, his grandson, what he wanted to do by coming to our event was to sort of see if he could unlock something about, because he was familiar with these documents. He knew they were important, but he didn't really, there was something that he wasn't able to really add up. And what I was able to reveal to him is that, these documents are extremely important. Your father was a man who was entrusted with hugely important wartime secrets. And it indicated the level, the degree to which his superiors, and his colleagues considered him to be important. He was an important person, and people trusted him, and he had people's lives in his hands. And he was just somebody who was very valuable. And his grandson had waited for over an hour to speak to me. And I gave him, I popped out, I gave him a cup of tea for his pains. And then when he cracked open this brown leather suitcase with all this material inside, and nearly had a heart attack, I was like, oh, for God's sake, don't spill the tea all over these precious treasures that you're unveiling, for goodness sake. It's one of, we can't discourage people from drinking cups of tea or coffee at a digital collection day.
No, not anywhere in the British Isles. The non-inclusion of tea is just, that's the kind of thing revolutions have started over. Yeah.
This is a tea-free digitization area. Please keep out. Yeah. The thing about it is, we also had, we had stories without objects, and objects without stories, or very little of a story to speak to. I mean, one thing that I really wanted to show you today, and I'm absolutely gutted. I have no idea why this isn't able to get through to you. But one of the things, I'll just describe it to you. It's a U.S. Army embarkation sign, and it's essentially, it's printed both sides in this American military sort of letterhead, letterheading,
stenciling,
font, stencil, exactly. And one side says closed to U.S. military and naval personnel, and the other side is to Route 23, and then twice it says to Route 43 to Route 43. So essentially what this sign is this is D-Day embarkation signage, and it's pointing the convoys of personnel moving down to Plymouth It's pointing them towards, different directions and, sort of different routeways that they have to take in order to get to their embarkation points. And this is part of the build-up for the D-Day operation. And, the story behind that sign is very simple. It stood there while the US military in the West Country was mobilizing, and then essentially it fell into disuse and then just simply was kicked in or fell into the ditch, which was beside it, beside where it stood, and they're arrested in the ditch for about 10 years until somebody pulled it out and had the presence of mind to put it in a shed and keep it there for so many decades until it was revealed to us at our digital collection day in Plymouth last year in 2023, and it's just fantastic. I mean, if you go go online to our website right now and just effectively search for embarkation sign or embarkation signage, you should be able to, and Plymouth, you should be able to find it. It's an absolutely fantastic item, and the story behind how the item was saved and preserved, because it could so easily been lost, and obviously plenty of them were lost, is a story in itself again. Again, one of the things I want to say to you is that we have objects with us that are of particular personal significance to the families who have shared them, because particularly for religious people, these objects are considered to be the reason why their loved one survived or endured what they endured. And I'll give you an example. Patrick Hughes, who served in the 2nd Royal Ulster Rifles, again, somebody who came in the first wave on Sword Beach. He was carrying with him a set of rosary beads, and very typical of the kind of rosary beads that you would find at that time in Ireland. So Patrick was I believe he was a Belfast Catholic. Certainly it's indicated by the fact that he's carrying a rosary, and but he served in the army for many years. He was actually a veteran of not one but two world wars. He had served in the First World War. He'd actually he'd lied about his age, and he had gotten in at some point between the age of 14 and 15 into a local regiment in Northern Ireland, what was then Ulster, now Northern Ireland, during the First World War. And he probably saw service on the Western Front. He definitely served in the Middle East, but I believe that was after the First World War. But it's very clear that he did serve, in a frontline capacity within the army, and he's back in the army again during the Second World War, and he's going in on D-Day, and he's got these rosary beads with him, and there's so much in the story that's not told. But you can just imagine that if indeed this rosary carried him through one world war, is it possible that that rosary was also used by him in the previous world war? Or just essentially, what was it that was keeping him sane? Yeah. Maybe not. Maybe, I'm a religious person. There's a number of people who are religious who might say, "Oh, the rosary got him through. The fact that he was a praying man got him through." My understanding of a rosary is I don't just view it as somebody who's religious. I don't just view it as a tool by which one interacts with God. It's also a tool that kind of keeps you sane when you're stressed out.
Connects you to home.
Yes, it connects you to home. There's something about the rhythm of going through the beads as you pray that kind of is cathartic and soothing, and it's something that can calm a person down. And it's inevitable with an item like that people will be able to sort of process the mental and emotional stress that they're going through. And I can only imagine Patrick Hughes sitting on board a landing ship in the Solent, waiting to embark as part of the Overlord flotilla heading to Sword Beach, and the nervousness that he might have been feeling and thinking of his family back home. He had a young infant son at home waiting for him, waiting for his return at the end of the war, and so he stood to lose quite a lot.
Well, I'm sure he may have been in the same landing craft as my great uncle, of course, was there in C Company, second RUR. So
Yeah.
I've got chill. You know, I'm all excited thinking about that story. It's very emotional. And the next thing I wanted to ask you, changing the tone slightly, is obviously the world is going D-Day bonkers crazy right now. I mean, I'm getting messages every 2 minutes. Just Nikki Campbell's radio show wanted me to be on, but I'm doing this. I'm talking to you, so I can't do it. But the brilliance of the fact that the media is picking up the anniversary of D-Day is the fact, the annoyance that they don't pick up all the other stories, is that, you know, that we do measure World War II through the big high notes, the D-Days, the Dam Busters Raid, the Battle of Britain Day. When your experience with the project, did you get people coming in whose relative was not connected with one of these high notes? They were in the RAF, but they weren't part of 617 Squadron, or they were in the Western Europe, but they didn't come ashore in June, and people not being aware that their relative was involved in something as big, because there's less information about the other battles, the other campaigns, that they were somehow thinking that their relative didn't contribute. Was that something that you encountered?
You know, off the top of my head, I have to say that yeah, there was one person that I encountered, and I can't just remember her name, but I encountered her at an event in Belfast. And sorry to sort of make this very Irish focused,
Well, that's why you're here.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, well, anyway, it was a very sort of chance encounter. She arrived at the Belfast event. She just popped up to have a look. And she said, "Oh, if I'd known this was on, I would have brought this, and this." And she had about 3 different stories and like tons of objects and items and material to go with the family stories that she had. About 3 family stories, and it was one relative who was in the Royal Air Force who was lost over Europe, was killed when his aircraft was brought down. You had another relative who served in the army, and there was another. Her mother was a nurse based in Scotland, so it's her father, her mother, and her uncle. Essentially, those stories, and there's a ton of material that she has, and she think, "Oh, it's too late. I've left it at home and whatever." And I said, "How long would it take you to return home and retrieve that material?" I said, "Do you have anything happening today? Would you be able to come along?" And she duly returned, and she brought ton stack of material, and she had stories just pouring out of her. There's another item, and there's another. "Oh, by the way, this person in my family served in the Home Guard." She said, "But I don't think this is really important. I don't think it would be of significance." And I was like, "Oh, of course it's significant. It's all significant." I said, "It's just, you know, tell us as much or as little as you want, but please don't hesitate from telling us about this relative's wartime service just because you don't think it's important." What was frustrating about that, I suppose, it was a wonderful experience meeting her, and I really enjoyed her company, and she was so bubbly and lovely, and she was so obliging. But what was frustrating was that she seemed to think that none of this was that important. She knew it was important, but she didn't think it was that important or that significant. And I just told her it's all significant. And the focus of our project was to tell people's ordinary stories. We have this mantra on this project of the ordinary being extraordinary and the extraordinary being ordinary. But to boil that down just that bit more, really what we were trying to do is we were trying to capture the ordinary, everyday, what people might consider to be mundane. Because if you think about it, what was ordinary and mundane during the Second World War is now a curiosity to us. The fact that you had people walking around wearing ARP helmets because there was a threat of an air raid, that's just not normal. The fact that you had sandbags, sort of in doorways of major public buildings, the fact that you had to tape your windows, the fact that you had sirens going off, like, I mean, and the fact that you were sort of going about your daily lives, like in places like London, and then basically there was a you know, it was basically a drone, what we consider to be a drone, going overhead, and you're just listening for the engine to stop before you run for cover. You know, this is just not normal stuff. It's we are now becoming acquainted with these kind of experiences again, because, you know, we're approaching, you know, a period of, I believe we can safely say that we're approaching a period of challenge and of possible conflict, and we may have to sort of become familiar with all this terminology and this way of thinking all over again, a wartime mentality, if you like. But what we were looking to do in this project, we were looking to capture, you know, how these people felt, how they thought, how they related their experiences to one another, as well as to, you know, sort of to themselves in many respects, and then later pass these experiences on to their children. And we found, and this was the unique selling point of the project, we found that within families, you know, sort of the wartime memory had been, you know, sort of relatively well preserved, and the items had been quite well kept. And, you know, and some people went out of their way to research these stories to make sure that they could iron out the mythology or the inaccuracies within them and make sure that there was proper context to them. But our job was to capture how the descendants of the wartime generation had absorbed this information and the way in which they contextualize it within their own, you know, sort of base of knowledge of the Second World War and the events of the Second World War. And that was really what we were looking to do.
No, definitely. And I think that we said it earlier, but the very fact that some people who participated downplayed their involvement, and in some ways some people kind of overplayed their involvement because they were very proud of what they did. And, you know, we've all heard the stories of the, you know, it was 20 German tanks coming over the hill, when in fact it was one German tank coming over the hill, which we don't knock the veteran for doing that, but it's a sense of pride and that contribution they gave. And others, oh, I wasn't really involved, and you find out later on they were a gallantry award winner. But that way that the individual contextualized it, and then how they shared it with their families and how their families are sharing it with their descendants is, you know, I guess at the heart of what your project is. It's not just the information, it's how was the information generated and how was it stored and how was it passed on. And this is very important. So my last question to you, Joseph, really is, now you've been on the channel before talking about your own interest in history and on Ireland and what have you, but this is a trite interviewer's question, but because you were a World War II enthusiast before this, but has this project changed you, Joseph? Have you come away with a different sense of the scope of World War II or anything? Is there anything particular that has affected you?
There is one thing that I have come away with. It's a sense that there were many people who came forward to our project, but there were some who came forward just a little bit too late, because it came to a particular point where we had to close off this project, and we had to close it and you know, sort of get the archive ready for release. And past a particular point, we could no longer accept stories or, you know, object submissions. We had to wrap things up. We had to get it all ready, and that's really why we have it ready to release today. Because of the fact we had to make that call. It was a difficult one, but there you go. But, you know, at one point I was speaking to somebody who her parents had met. Her grandparents had met as they had been pen pals, and they had never met each other in the flesh. And the day that they met was their wedding day. They arranged. Wow. He proposed to her by letter. She agreed by letter. They arranged to meet at such and such a place at such and such a time by letter. And, you know, they met outside the front of the church on their wedding day. And that was just, to me, that was absolutely mad. And I just thought I had to get that story in. And I asked the person seemed interested when I first started speaking to her, but then I asked her over and over and over again. And that story never went into the archive because at a particular point, she stopped taking it seriously, or maybe I think sometimes the point I'm trying to make is people, I think, become complacent about this memory. They think it might last forever. And the whole lesson that we're trying to impart to people is that, no, it's not going to be around forever. It could be forgotten. It could be lost, unless you take the steps to preserve it. I think what has struck me more than anything is the idea that people have, because they've been living with the Second World War for so long, they feel it's so omnipresent and embedded in our culture, and with so many subject experts and so many sources, that they don't possibly conceive that the knowledge, sort of the intimate awareness of this conflict and what it was like may disappear or may fade. It will fade. It can fade. And this is why finding a way to back up your memory is important. And don't be complacent about it. Don't think that because you have been offered an opportunity to preserve a story or a memory this time around, you chose not to take it, then another opportunity will come around. There was sadly just a little bit of complacency that I noticed, that I felt was a little bit disturbing. And I suppose what I would like, if this project has a legacy, a long-term legacy, it's really it's not to be the be-all and end-all of Second World War digitalization projects. It's for me, this is just, this is a major step in a particular direction, but the fundamental purpose of this project will be to show people the way. This is how you do it.
Yeah.
This is how it can be done. And one day, hopefully, we'll be able to integrate all this knowledge, record, research, memory history, particularly connecting up with new sources coming online, such as the Service Record Project. And we'll be able to join all this up, and we'll be able to, we'll all be able to centralize all this information, and we'll have a comprehensive online search facility to join up everybody's story, and to essentially add color to the paint by number. And I'm really looking forward to that time.
That's a good idea. And, the fact that people like ourselves, we live through, well, obviously in Ireland, lots of things have happened in the last 80 years. Not going to downplay them. But for me, I think of things like the miners' strike and things like that I lived through, and the Falkland Islands that we assume, well, everyone knows about that because we lived through it and we saw it on the TV. But it only keeps living on if people do save those things. It's like, we're going off the tangent, we haven't got that long, but people save things like commemorative coins for royal weddings, but they don't save different crisp bag designs. And it's those kind of things that if someone doesn't keep something ordinary, the ordinary stuff gets lost, but the main notes, people remember the big note. They keep the newspaper headlines of the first flight of Concorde or JFK's assassination, but they don't necessarily keep the other newspapers. I know there are lots of online archives folks, but it's that general principle of not just saving the big stuff, saving the small stuff, because the way the small memories help flesh out the large memories. Is that? I think that's the point I'm making.
I would agree 100%. One of the things I just also want to I'll point to a particular example. So yesterday I was at the Portsmouth DDay event. I was essentially promoting their finest hour, building it into a sort of the coverage of DDay, as I'm doing with you right now. And the King was there, and the King spoke about veterans, and you could see that the King and Queen were extremely emotional, and they got emotional in a BBC program that was aired last night, where they met veterans in Buckingham Palace. And you could see that he was fighting back the tears, and I don't for a second think that that's put on. I don't think as they say in Northern Ireland, those be crocodile tears you're crying. It's not. This is genuine emotion from a monarch who you know, from a very young age, he's known the wartime generation. He met Field Marshal Montgomery. He has known these people from the top brass all the way down to the ordinary soldier, and he's met them and he's interacted with them, and they've been present in his life. And I think in some ways he's aware of his age, but in some ways he seems to be struggling to come to terms with the fact that this generation will no longer been around, because actually for some people all they've known is the wartime generation. But if you simplify it to the king's late mother, the late Queen, how many of us thought we would have to say goodbye to her when we did? I think some of us in our heads thought that she'd be there forever.
Yeah,
goes on forever, but she's gone now. She's sadly gone. Her time came to an end, and her reign, which we all remember, is now becoming part of the past. It's becoming part of history, and our memory of that reign is going to be less lucid as time goes by. Yeah, and this is what the problem with memory, and what we have to interrogate when you're dealing with memory.
I mean, you and I at our ages will probably never have to ever sing again "God Save the Queen," because it's just we've got one and we're going to have another one, and that's probably how it's going to go now. So that's it. That's the memory of singing "God Save the Queen" has now been supplanted. All the people who are young now will only have to know how to sing. I mean, it's the same tune, folks, same words, but "God Save the King." It's just that's the standard thing. It's just things change very quickly, and the past the present becomes the past.
I will say one thing, Paul, and it's a very important point to make. I'm not really in a position to sing "God Save the King." I mean, not that I have anything against people who do, but yeah, of course. But one of the things I would say is it is a very important point.
Collectively, I meant collectively, we society. Yeah,
it's a joke. But the thing about it is that the changing of the times and the changing of the tides in many respects is something that can be unsettling. It can be upsetting, which is, I suppose, one of the utilities of projects such as these, to sort of like the Polaroid, the snapshot of that generation. But we're taking it, at second relief. And don't think because you have a story that you're sitting on to do with the wartime generation that because, you don't have the full story or you don't feel that it's important, that there isn't a purpose behind preserving it. There is a purpose, and the purpose, you are providing a service to society by preserving your own family members' memories and any personal effects to do with their wartime service. You're actually doing a service to society. That's, if I have anything to a note to leave on, it would be that preserving these stories is providing a fundamental service to our society, and that's why it's important that you should do it.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic note to end it on. So, Joseph, it's been great talking to you. Folks, go online. The link is in the description below, and check out this amazing resource yourself. We will return to the subject at some point in the future. I'm back in another 5 minutes' time with my next guest, who is also talking about Portsmouth. Andrew Whitmarsh from the D-Day story will be on with us in a few minutes. But thank you, Joseph. Thank you, everybody, for listening and your comments. I will see you soon on this mammoth D-Day 80 live stream extravaganza. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Bye. Bye, Joseph.
Bye.